Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench we have, well, one of the types of watches that I love to work on. This watch belongs to Corey, who's a Patreon supporter of mine, who reached out, and he's getting married and he wanted to wear this watch at his wedding. The reason, it belonged to his grandfather. As you can see, it's got an engraving on the back here. And this is to Carl Childs, that was his grandfather. Best wishes, South Jersey Operators Association, 1974. And that was for McDonald's. His grandpa worked for McDonald's during that time frame. And as you can see, he's wearing his watch in many of these photos. And during his time with McDonald's, he was a field consultant. And he actually worked his way up through the company, eventually owning 2 stores in North Carolina, where Corey is from. Now, unfortunately, his grandfather passed away a few years ago. And when they found out that he was sick, he had a conversation with Corey where they had been talking about watches. And he said he pulled this watch out and he said, "It's yours if you can take care of it. It's a special memento." He was very proud of his work. And, you know, it seems like he did a really good job moving his way up through the ranks and eventually owning a couple of stores. That's no small feat. And this was a special memento from his time working. He ended up becoming a pastor later in life, right up until he passed away. And, you know, Corey told me he wanted to wear this watch so that his grandfather could kind of be at the wedding with him and that he knew that he had him with him. But it hadn't been serviced, it hadn't been taken care of, and he really wanted to have it looked at. And that's when he sent it to me. So this is a big deal. You know, these type of watches mean the world to people. They're worth far more than any monetary value would convey. And yeah, I'm honestly honored to be able to work on things like this. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to get this watch running, and we're going to make sure it's running well, and we'll take a look at some of the cosmetic stuff. And that's our project for today. So let's put it on the time grapher and see how it's running. This is a machine that will measure the function of the watch. As you can see, it's not doing particularly well, minus 44 seconds a day. 209 degrees of amplitude is actually okay. So we've got some hope here. He doesn't think that it's ever been serviced, but you know, we'll find out when we open it up. Right now I can use this rubber. Oh man. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, this probably hasn't been opened up in a while. So I'm going to have to break out the case back opening machine here. Rather, the rubber ball actually does do most of the work for you, but in this case, it wasn't quite enough. You can see that there's these grooves on the back side of the case. And my case opening tool here, it has multiple different attachments that you can do. This one has a small pin, which would probably work, but there's a better fit. You can see there's kind of a squared off end, and you can use whichever one matches up best with the case back that you're opening. They tend to vary by manufacturer. They each kind of have their own way to affix these case backs and to take them back off. As you can see, there's these 2 plastic posts that kind of hold the case firmly, and then you can bring down the actual tool. And then these wheels on the side dictate the length between those 2 pins. So once you get it firmly in place, there's a nice big wheel on top, and you can simply turn it. With the kind of leverage that you have, most case backs will come off relatively easily once you're using the big machine like this. And that's what happened here. So this will give us our first look at the movement, which of course is, you know, the beating heart of the watch, the most important part. Let's see what we've got. And, oh, wow, this actually does look really clean in here. Interesting. This actually may not have been serviced before. Wow, I'm impressed. This watch is super clean inside and definitely could use a service, no doubt about it. But that's very promising. Let's take a look at the dial. It's hard to see under the scratched up crystal. Oh, whoa. That thing is like perfect. Look at that dial. It looks like it's brand new. Wow. I have to say, I did not expect that. That looks like a factory fresh dial on this watch that is 50 years old, 51 years old at this point. That's a great sign, and it is another indicator that this watch may not have been disassembled before. We may be the first ones to do so. I'm going to take off the hands first, and I'll place them in a membrane box. It just has little two thin plastic membranes inside to sort of suspend the hands and make sure they don't get damaged. As you can see, this is an automatic movement. That rotor right there is what actually winds up the watch. And I'll start by removing it so it's not flapping around and so we can get to the screws that are underneath. And now I can go about removing the dial. As you can see, I'm using tweezers with wood tips on it. They're very soft so that they won't mar the dial. They don't hold up very well, and they're not very sturdy as far as picking up small parts or being very steady with it, but they work really well at picking up things that you just don't want to, risk any damage on. Now we can take, as you can see, this watch has both a day and a date, and the day disc goes in the middle. There's this little washer shim thing that holds it in place. So we'll take that off, and then we can take off the day. And now there's this inner plate that holds down, it actually holds down multiple things, but primarily it holds down the date disc, which you can see goes around the outside edge. And I can just remove this plate. And there's an intermediate wheel here, kind of an interesting one. You can see it has two different sizes on it. One of them interacts with the hour wheel in the middle, and then the other interacts with the calendar wheel on the side. I can now remove the cannon pinion with my cannon pinion removal tool, and it looks like I jarred loose the date disc as well, so we might as well remove that. And we'll set that aside. This is a little lever down here that is, it looks like it's for the quick set mechanism. This watch has the ability to cycle through the day and the date independent of turning the hands around, so that you can kind of, if you don't wear your watch for a while, you can get it to the correct date quickly. Okay, now we're going to disassemble this movement. And the way this works, especially if this is your first time joining me on one of these, is we're going to take apart everything. Like all the parts come apart. It's a little weird. We don't do that these days with very many products. But watches, you can strip them down all the way to every screw and part comes out, and then you can clean them, and then we'll reassemble them and relubricate. I'm going to let down the mainspring. This is basically, if there's any wind in the watch, that can create tension on some of the parts. And as you go to disassemble them, they could go flying apart. And so you want to make sure that there's no tension on any of the parts when you're doing a disassembly like this. Oh, you can see there's definitely some dirt and grime built up around where the mainspring barrel meets up there. That's a common sign of needing to be serviced. There's some grease that's applied to that part, or oil, and it looks like it's dried up. I can now take out the balance. This is the part that oscillates, that helps, that really dictates the watch's timekeeping. It's the most important part of the mechanism. It's also the most delicate, so it's going to get set aside. And then there's a plate that goes over the top of the movement. Interesting here, I can see there's a couple of non-jeweled pivots in the middle there. Typically for a watch like this, all of those would be jeweled. They use a synthetic ruby. That's the red dots that you see. But looks like this one, not every one is jeweled. I can take out the wheels that are up above now. And then interestingly, this watch also has this brass mechanism you see. This is called a hack. The job of this part is to stop the watch from moving or, going while you're setting the time. And that allows you to set the time very accurately, because you can set it to the second if you'd like. This is a really genius part here. Take a look at this. This is the click. So this is the part, it's really interesting. You can see different design aesthetics and different design philosophies come out when you take these apart. This is a Japanese-made watch, and this is like a genius part. That part is both a spring and a click mechanism, and all it is a bent piece of metal Ooh, yeah, there's some more grime on the bottom of the mainspring there. See that right there? That is built up dirt and oil that has dried up and is now probably acting as more of an abrasive than a lubricant, which of course is the opposite effect. So definitely needs to be cleaned up. But yeah, that click and being a click spring and a click all in one, just simple metal part is just crazy. If you've seen a bunch of my other videos, you'll know that the Swiss made ones require 3 different parts, although 2 to replace that because they do have a screw that's in common, but they have a actual click and then a spring that is separate from it that activates on it. And it's much more complicated, harder to manufacture, easier to screw up. It does happen to look better and I think sound a little better too. And you know, you do have to start thinking about that type of stuff when you're looking at watches like this, because I mean, as you're probably aware, we have access to timekeeping devices now that far exceed what these are capable of. Oh yeah, look at that grease. Oh, that's just dried up. Yeah, for sure. Definitely this watch is in dire need of a service. But yeah, I mean, you know, your phone, a quartz watch, they all are much better timekeepers than these. So the question becomes, why do we care about mechanical watches now? If they're obsolete, why are we even bothering with them? And, you know, there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, they're interesting. They're really cool. If you like mechanical stuff, they're really interesting. The level of accuracy that these can get being purely mechanical is astonishing. And I think just something that's really impressive in and of itself. And then, you know, as I talked about before, these are sentimental pieces. These are things that mean a lot more to them than the sum of their parts. You know, this is something that will remind Corey of his grandpa who isn't around anymore. You know, I mean, there's not a lot of, you know, cell phones that do that or whatever. So, you know, that's why these things are important. This is a big spring going around the outside edge, and I'm going to take it off carefully just in case it's under tension. These are the types of springs that could pop away from you pretty easily. I can't really quite tell how much tension it's actually under though. Maybe if there we go. It actually doesn't look like it was under too much, so that's not too bad. More just a precaution. Okay, there's the calendar jumper. Man, that's really impressive too. That part was both the jumper and the spring integrated together, where on a Swiss watch, those would be 2 separate parts. And again, if you've watched my videos, you know that those can fly away very easily, in fact. And as I go to the keyless works, we'll see another example of that right here. That's the yoke and the yoke spring together as one part. That is just so elegant, the way that that's designed. On a Swiss watch, those again would be 2 separate parts, and they can, in fact, that's the one I call the Born to Fly spring. Here's the sliding clutch. Oh, this is interesting. If you notice here, this one doesn't have the extra part that you normally see. And the reason for that is because this watch actually cannot be manually wound. It doesn't need that part because that's the part that interacts with the manual winding part of the watch. And this one can't. This one's automatic only. Take a look at the mainspring now and we'll see what we're working with. It could absolutely be in fine shape in here, even with that wear that you see. A little hard to tell. It's definitely greasy and there's some dirt that got in there, but it doesn't look too bad. I'm just going to take out the barrel arbor, this part in the middle. Whoa! Oh, I got lucky. Oh man, it fell on my tool tray there, but that's pretty lucky. Those things, thankfully, those are pretty big. You can hear them hit the ground and you can usually find them. But since it is under a spring, this is the mainspring that I was talking about earlier. That's a lot of tension and they can fly pretty well. To take out the mainspring, we just have to do it by hand. There's just no other way to do it. I should also mention, if you're interested in this as a hobby, or if you know somebody that might be, who likes mechanical things or cars or taking stuff apart or just finds watches interesting, I did start a website with my friend Alex. It's called sutcliffehansen.com, and it has toolkits. Like we have some that are gifts that come with a movement and the tools that you need to take it apart and put it back together, all the way up to more complete kits for people that really want to dive in. And I'd love it if you check it out. It's sutcliffehansen.com. There's a link down below in the description. As you can see, there's a little bit of grease left over on the mainspring barrel here, so I'm just going to use some Rodico to clean that up as I start to put all of the things into the watch cleaning machine basket. We'll set that aside because I got to look at this case. It's got a weird case. You can see there's no proper lugs on it. This was typical of design sensibilities in the 70s. But it does mean that I need to take a look at the crystal, and then we have to do we got to figure out what we want to do with the case. I can take off this, well, calling this a gasket at this point is probably not accurate. Look at this. It's so brittle by now. This used to be a soft rubber gasket. Now it just breaks with even the slightest bit of tension. That's okay though. I'm going to replace that regardless, as it's probably the original. Now I can see that there's a little groove on the side of the bezel here that I can, yeah, there we go. Pry off the bezel with my case opening knife. And I can set that aside and then take a look at the crystal itself. It's in pretty rough shape. If I can get a replacement, I'd like to. Oh, I see. So this is what they call an armored crystal. This one actually has a little bit of extra reinforcement down along the bottom. Do you see that golden colored ring that goes along the bottom? That actually acts as a tension ring to push out on the crystal and help create a better seal with the case. Do you see it right there? It's kind of built into the edge of the case. It does actually come out as well. And as you can see, the color of it is colored to match the case. You can get them in a steel silver color or a gold color like this. Here's the bezel itself. And as you can see, it's taken the brunt of the years of wear that it's had, as it has gotten a bit beaten up, but it's held up pretty well. Mainly, it's just got a whole bunch of gunk and dirt under it and on it. And I'll want to clean that up just for, to make it look nice, and then also to make sure that it can do its job. This type of setup is both for looks, to have that extra bezel. Yeah, you can see all that dirt coming off of it. That's from years and years of use. It also does help pinch down the crystal and create that watertight seal. So this is probably a relatively waterproof watch. And you can tell because no water got in it. And as you can see from the photos, Corey's grandpa wore this thing. I mean, this thing really saw some wear, and it looked like he was a hard-working person. So, all right, we can put everything into the watch cleaning machine now, and this is just going to be a 3-step cleaning process. This first one is a cleaning fluid, then there's 2 rinses, and then a drying cycle that it goes through. And as you can see, I like to kind of get it dialed in. This is called a Mastermatic from L&R. It actually oscillates back and forth. Some of the more basic models just simply spin, but this one actually goes back and forth, which can help clean the parts even a little bit better. While the parts are being cleaned, I did want to say thank you to each and every person who supports me on Patreon. Patreon is a place where you can go to support your favorite content creators directly. And I'm really grateful for everybody who supports me there. It lets me keep making these videos. I love making these videos for you. As you might imagine, they're quite resource intensive. They take a long time, and it really helps out to get supported on something like Patreon because it's nice and consistent. So if you're interested, it's patreon.com/wristwatchrevival, and you can find the link down below, and you get a thank you card and a Wristwatch Revival sticker for signing up, and you get access to the videos a little early, ad-free versions of them, stuff like that. Anyway, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, let's put the case into the ultrasonic cleaner here. Not really sure exactly how I want to handle this case thing yet, but the truth is, until we get it all cleaned up, I won't really know what kind of condition it's in or if we want to do anything to it at all. So this is the best way to clean parts like this, particularly like bracelets and big things that it's almost impossible to get into the nooks and crannies on, is an ultrasonic cleaner. I use a kind of a clinical detergent in it called Liquinox. And that's it. I mean, this is not harsh chemicals, anything like that. But you can see as I turn it on, you can see the dirt already just kind of flowing away from the bracelet. And that's places where, you're just not going to be able to get in there. And you see all that dirt already coming out. That's something that you just couldn't do with a different tool. So we'll let it run its cycle. It runs heated, and it runs for about 20 minutes or so. And as you can see, the water's dirty and the parts are pretty clean. They get rinsed off just with water, and then I'll usually dry them as well. And then we can kind of see what we've got. I put the crystal in here too, just to get us an idea of where it's at. My gut tells me that the crystal was really kind of deeply scratched up and quite old and probably should just be replaced. But the question on that is, can I find a replacement for it? Because if I can't, then I can refurbish the crystal as well. I just think that with the level of damage on it, that's not our first option. Take a look at everything all laid out, perfectly cleaned up out of the watch cleaning machine and the ultrasonic cleaner. And that is a very satisfying sight, as it gives us the canvas on which we will be working going forward here. We're going to start things off with the rebuild. So we've got the mainspring here, which actually looks totally fine. And I'm fine reusing this mainspring as well. We could replace it. That's something that's an option. But when they're in really good shape like this, I'm also okay reusing it. Particularly, tiebreaker would be that, this is an important watch to the person for its originality on some level. So we're going to go ahead and reuse it. I get to use my mainspring winders for this now. This is a tool that will allow you to safely replace the mainspring back in the barrel. You can do this by hand. If you remember when I kind of walked the mainspring out, when I took it out, you can do that back in, but it becomes very difficult to do it without damaging the mainspring or getting it a bunch of fingerprint oil all over it, which isn't good for it. Or if you wear the finger cots like I wear here, or gloves, then it'll pinch the little pieces of it off and it'll be in between the coils, and that's not good either. So this tool really does come in handy, as basically it gives you a way to wind the mainspring in reverse of where it would normally go. And then you can simply place it back into the barrel in one fell swoop. I can just take out this, the winding handle gently and make sure the spring doesn't go flying out of there. There it is. All nicely nestled and ready to be put back in. But before we do, I do need to use some braking grease. This is a special type of grease that goes on the outside wall of the mainspring barrel here. And it's because the spring will push up against that, but doesn't have any way to slow itself down. So it would just be metal on metal friction around the outside. And this grease makes sure that it can spin at just the right rate. With that in there, though, we can now put the mainspring back in, aka the best part. Oh yeah, love that feeling. And take a look at that. The mainspring is sitting nicely back in its home. I can now put the barrel arbor back in. This is the part that kind of hooks onto that middle part of the mainspring, so that when the watch gets wound up, it actually turns that mainspring and pulls it inside. A little bit of medium viscosity oil here, just to make sure that that can spin smoothly. And then to fully put the lid back on, I like to use this little plastic tool. It's nothing fancy. I got it off of eBay, but it just helps apply pressure evenly around that top surface. You can also use your tweezers to do it. I just think that, maybe it makes a little more chance of damage if you do. Now I can start putting the movement back together. I am really curious to see if this thing's going to run well, if we can get it running well again. That, of course, is kind of mission number one. I mean, if the watch doesn't work, it kind of doesn't matter what it looks like at that point, right? So we will start here. As you can see, this one does have kind of an interesting little bridge that goes over the center wheel there. That center wheel is hollow. And there's another pivot that goes all the way through it, and that's for the center seconds hand. That is a feature that is ubiquitous now for the most part, but when wristwatches first started to come into fashion, they were mostly styled after and miniaturized versions of the movements that were in pocket watches at the time, which were the standard. As you can see, by the way, if there's any little something that gets on there, you can just use a little bit of Rodico. It's kind of like silly putty that doesn't leave residue behind to put it on. But the pocket watches had sub-seconds hands, meaning that they weren't attached to the middle where the other hands are. They were kind of down at the bottom of the dial. But people really like it when the hands are all stacked up together. And so that's why you see that here. This is, by the way, that click and click spring combo that I was talking about before. Such a simple device. it's really impressive engineering. You can see it's got some tension to it and then a little bit of a lip, and that'll actually interact with the wheel that we'll put on in a little bit. This again is the hack mechanism. This is a part that is designed to stop the watch when you're setting it, as I mentioned. And now I can put the wheels into place. You can see when they interact with the bottom pivot there, they kind of fall into place. That's what you're looking for. And then this is that center seconds that I was talking about. The seconds hand will actually attach to that tip that I'm putting in place now on the other side of the watch. There we go. And as you can see, it does interact with the escape wheel over there. And with those wheels seated, I can now put on this big plate that goes over the top. This one actually covers a number of pivots. It's a little bit intimidating. You can see there's 4 pivots in the middle and then one off to the side. For a total of 5, that's a lot of things that you have to line up simultaneously, although it looks like it's mostly fallen into place right away. Oh, I see what's happening. That click spring is actually underneath the bridge, so I just need to temporarily move it out of the way so that the whole thing can fall down into place, and let's see. There we go. Wow, that's just really nice engineering when a part that complex can come together that easily, even for somebody like me who doesn't even do this professionally. And as you can see, I'll use my plastic pointer stick just to make sure to keep that bridge in place while I screw down the first of the screws, and then I can go ahead and put down the rest once I know that it's securely in place and that all the pivots are correctly aligned. I like to double check a lot too. That's how I was taught to do it, and I do that. I was taught, by the way, via online. I mean, mostly on YouTube here, but also I took the classes from Mark Lovick. He has a channel here called the Watch Repair channel, and he has a website called Watch Fix, where he has tutorials that he made. They are excellent. I've recommended them for years. And after I started the website, the Cycliff Hansen website, I wanted to have tutorials on there for people that were buying kits. And I was like, his are just so good that like, there's no way I could make better ones. I mean, he's more qualified. Like, he's been doing watch repair as a profession for like 30 years. So he really, really knows his stuff, but he's also really good at explaining it. And he kind of sparked my passion for this when I found him on YouTube and realized, I may be able to actually try this out myself. And while it is a difficult hobby, make no mistake, it is the kind of thing that you can actually do. In fact, it was a really cool kind of full circle moment. I asked him if we could sell his tutorials on Cycliff Hansen, because to me, they were just the best ones. And I wanted to, get those to our customers. And so we worked out a deal, and you can actually buy those on Cycliff Hansen, like when you buy a kit, or you can even just buy them on their own. And, you get a code mailed to you right away, and you can learn the same way I did. Okay. Looks like the Keyless Works has come together quite nicely here. Again, little bits of genius in the engineering of these parts. Combining 2 parts together that could be one is such a time saver for both reinstallation, complexity, all of those things. And the designers of this watch were very keen to do that. This blue stuff is a high viscosity grease. It's meant to really go for parts that are metal on metal and under tension, but I did put a little bit too much on, so I'm going to use some Rodico to take it off just to tidy it up. A little dot of the same blue grease goes on the side of the canyon pinion, and then I can press it into place. This is the ratchet wheel that goes on top. This is what the click actually touches up against. You can see it down at the bottom there. And this is, the little genius part with that click, is that that's all that's really needed. It's just a little bit of tension on the edge of that wheel, and it works plenty fine. It just needs to prevent it from unwinding. That's all. Okay, with that done, we can turn our attention to the escapement. This is part of it. This is called the pallet fork. I'm going to clean it manually just because it uses shellac, which is kind of an organic adhesive that can soften under certain conditions in the watch cleaning machine. So I just do it separately. It only takes an extra minute. Anyway, I can put it into place here and then put the pallet fork bridge in place as well. This is yet another dual purpose part another really nice design. It has these banking edges on it there where the pallet fork actually bangs up against as it goes back and forth. Again, on a Swiss watch, that would be a separate part mostly. There are some movements that have a similar design to this there too. Okay, now I can actually give it a wind. Remember, I can't wind the watch up with the crown, so I have to just kind of do it manually here and make sure that the fork, there we go, goes back and forth with just the lightest of touch. And then I can continue to make sure that it's tightened down all the way. This is, again, just one of those double checking things to make sure that everything's aligned before you tack it down all the way with the screws. Now, the last part here is the balance. And I can put it into place, and we'll see if this watch will kick back up to life. It should, as it was running before. You do have to make sure that the pivot is in there, and then there's also an impulse jewel that has to line up with the pallet fork itself, so it's a little bit of a chore. There we go, but this one kicked up very easily. You love to see that. That's always a good sign that things went together well. And then I can screw down the balance bridge here as well. Okay. So that's looking good. And in fact, it looks like it has a decent amount of amplitude. I'll give it a little bit more wind before we do the oiling. So I'm going to oil up the jewels on the top. As I mentioned, a few of these are just kind of metal on metal. They don't actually have a jewel like this one. And of course, there's the balance jewel here as well. This one is, as you can see, quite a bit more complex than a normal jewel. This is the part that breaks if you drop your watch on the ground. And so they've developed a really nice system here to make sure that risk is minimized. And it involves using a small metal spring and a cap jewel here with a jewel setting that allows that whole setting to kind of move around a little bit if it were to get dropped. And this is the spring here. It's made of brass. It's very, very thin. And then I can take the jewel setting out as well. So all three pieces will come out. On this particular version of a shock setting, the spring itself is removed completely. I prefer the ones that let you leave the spring still attached to the balance because it's just one less thing to worry about dropping or losing. Okay, I can put them into the solvent here, and I'll just use my just a stick here just to kind of manually clean the bottom. That's a very flat surface on that jewel, but it needs to be completely clean to really work. So I like to do a little bit of manual cleaning there just to make sure that there's no residue before I put on the oil again. I can put just a small droplet of oil right in the middle of this jewel, and then I can simply put the lower shock setting back into place. And what it'll do is it'll kind of capillary action itself back on there, as you can see, and then I can replace it back into the balance itself. And as you can see, the pivot goes right there where the oil sits, and that'll keep it lubricated for the long term. And then I can replace this spring. It's kind of a two tweezer operation, as you need to get the lip of the three lobes of that spring kind of down below the edge there and then turn. And once you have the third one in there, then you know that it's secure. Sometimes the balance will stop while you're doing this. That's mainly just because I'm pushing down slightly on the top of that jewel, and it'll just impact the pivot and it'll make it stop, but nothing to worry about. And then once it's lined up properly, like that, the balance can run free. Okay, after doing some adjustments, let's see how it ended up on the time grapher. Hey, that's pretty good. -2, -3 seconds a day, over 200 degrees of amplitude, and a very low beat error. That's what we want to see. And this watch is running quite nicely. That's a relief. It wasn't running super poorly when it came in, but I did want to make sure that it was capable of getting a lot more accurate reading on the time grapher. And that's exactly what happened. So with that means that if you remember, this watch does have a calendar mechanism with both a day and date. And so we need to turn the watch over and start to reassemble that. This one has actually quite a bit going on with that. It has the calendar mechanism. itself. And then it also has the quick set date, right? The one where you can just change the date itself and just bump it forward so you don't have to sit there and turn the crown over and over and over and over to do it manually. So we need to make sure that all of that's going too. This is part of the calendar works here. It goes on the bottom. Interestingly, this part is plastic. Not a huge fan of that, but it is something that you see every once in a while on these Seikos, and there's a few other brands that use plastic. It does have its benefits as far as like not needing lubrication and being kind of the perfect material for it, but there is the concern that it will wear out if it gets overused, basically. That said, this watch is already about 50 years old and it looks like it's holding up fine. So maybe there's not that big of an argument for that part. They don't put it on parts that have like a high friction, area or anything like that. So you can see this is the wheel that turns around, that actually turns the date wheel, the date disc around. A little bit of this medium viscosity oil. Again, this is the red stuff is the medium. So it's for parts that, are going to be under some friction, but not heavy spring-loaded type friction. And then we use the light blue oil, which is Mobius 9010. That gets put on, the pivots and the really light friction areas. That's just a little post that this intermediate wheel goes on. This is the one that has the bottom part being a different size than the top. And there's just a little connecting plate here that covers up the minute wheel. So we'll get that installed carefully. And again, a little bit of medium viscosity oil on the post here. And this is the part that I mentioned before that will move this is the quick set date part for the day. And what it does is, the way it works is you actually push the crown in to move the date a day forward. This is another one of those, this is a jumper for that outer date disc, and it's really nice. It's a spring and a jumper in one. It's like, that's just such the smart way to do it. Okay, now we can put the day disc in place. It is held under a little bit of tension, as you can see, as I release that spring-loaded part. And then there's this plate that goes, again, over kind of everything and holds it into place. Like that. And it's held on by a few screws itself. Huh. So I want to put the hour wheel in place because that's what needs to go on before the dial and everything. And I realized that it actually won't fit with this plate on. Whoops. It looks like I got a little bit ahead of myself. So I'm going to need to take that plate off in order to put the hour wheel on. Kind of a silly mistake. Oh, no, really? Okay. So even I have to go back further, actually, because it looks like this part right here that pushes the date disc around, it also is in the way. So I need to take off the disc and I need to take off this upper part of the wheel, and then hopefully I can put this thing in place. Wow, I really missed the ball on that one. There we go. See, that is supposed to sit down like that, and then this part can go on. Yeah, it looks like I got way ahead of myself. Normally, that isn't the case, that the hour wheel, it usually goes on last. But with this date complication going, that isn't the case. So a little bit of a rewind, a deep breath, and we forge onward. And again, this plate will kind of hold everything into place. And now I can give it a quick test, and there you go. You can see as that wheel spins around, it will eventually move it over. And then this is the quick set. You can see it's moving the date disc one day at a time as I go. Now, one part that I didn't take apart yet, and that I still need to, is the automatic winding works here. And this is another example of really genius engineering. Such a simple way to do this. They have this thing right here. I think they call it a magic pawl. And it basically has two hands that reach out across this one wheel. And it basically makes it so that the wheel, whenever it turns, it kind of can't go backwards again. And it captures that motion. And when it does that, it winds up the watch. I'm going to give it a quick clean with some Rodico before doing the lubrication and putting it back together. This did go through the watch cleaning machine, so the parts are pretty good and clean, but I just hadn't really disassembled it so that I could do the lubrication part. So now I'll just put it back together. Just 2 screws hold this whole thing together. I know I keep saying it, but just really impressed by that. Okay, so with that done, now I can continue to put this calendar works back together with the day disc. As you can see, this one has Spanish and English, and you can kind of pick which one you want to use. Give it a turn, and we should see both, there we go, of the wheels turn around. And then there's this little clip that goes on the top. There's an interesting thing with this where it says, you can see it says C-ring upward. And what that means is that on the bottom of this, it's sloped so that you can actually get a screwdriver over it. But a lot of people put it with the flat side down thinking that it needs to be flat against the ground, but it doesn't. And again, pushing the crown in actually advances the day and date 1 day at a time. And this is the dial going on now. And again, I mean, I'm sure you can see it, but that is an absolutely stunning dial for the age that it's had. I mean, just the sun will usually do a bunch of damage to a dial like that, let alone people opening it, closing it. If any water gets in the case or dust or anything like that, it kind of gets embedded on the dial. Really impressed with how well that dial has held up. It is gorgeous. And I'm not going to be doing anything to it. There's luminous material on both the hands and the hour markers. Sometimes I replace that, but honestly, this loom looks amazing. It's that kind of creamy golden color. It probably doesn't glow super well, but you know, even if it's brand new, it's not like it's sitting there just glowing all night or whatever. You know, most of this luminous material was made to shine a light on it to kind of wake it up for a second, like if you're underwater or something like that. And it's not like it just glows brightly all night. Even the new stuff doesn't do that. Okay, now I can put the hands on, including the seconds hand here, and push the crown in to let the hack undo. And again, I'm just making sure that that the date turns over right around midnight. So let's see if I can get that to happen. It starts here. When does it finish? Oh, that's pretty dang close, actually, right at about midnight. Okay, let's take a look at the case. It looks actually really good out of the ultrasonic. I'm not going to do anything to that. That it has a little bit of wear, but we want that. I mean, that came from Corey's grandpa. I'll show you what I was talking about before with this, armored glass is what they call it. It's like a tension ring that goes in here. And as you can see, it is color matched. You know, it's gold as well. I really am. I think I'm going to replace this crystal. I was able to find one online that's a replacement for it. And if that's the case, I think that it's worth it to replace it, not only for the aesthetic point, but also because of the structural part. You know, it's like that is an old crystal that's seen a lot of use. And since I can still find brand new ones from Seiko online, I think it's worth it to replace it. So I'm going to do that here. Now, these ones have to be kind of just force pressed into the case. It's a little different than the ones I normally do because of that tension ring. And that's what you want to see. You want to see it just sort of seat itself down into the case. And once it does, that tension ring will hold it in place. Now, I also need to replace the bezel. I need to use a different attachment on my Rober press here to do that. A little bigger one that's deeper so that it can reach around the crystal and press that bezel into place. But it also is just held on by friction. So once I get it properly aligned, like that, I can do that and just press it into place. And so that'll hold the crystal there. And of course the bezel looks nice as well. Okay, so let's take a look. Yeah, hey, that's looking really good. Can use my air blower here to get a little bit of the dust off, but this thing is looking nice. I'm actually really impressed by the case. I need to put this plastic holder on. Oh no, don't tell me I did this again. it doesn't look like it fits with the dial already on. Oh, man. So here we go. I get to redo some more work. So I need to take off the hands and at least the dial to get that plastic retaining thing on there. I did not realize that. I thought it went on after, but it doesn't. So again, another deep breath and a little bit of rework here. These are some of the things that you go through, especially for me. I'm always working on different watches. I like to keep it fresh and, have different stuff here for you to watch. And it means that, those little tricks that you kind of learn when you work on the same thing over and over again, I often don't know them. So yes, but a quick reassembly of the dial and the hands means that I can now put the movement into the case with that plastic retaining ring in place. And then there's also a metal movement holder here. This just basically takes up the space between the movement and the edge of the case so that the movement is securely held and can't rattle around. Now that it's there, I can put on the automatic winding module. This is before we put on the rotor that actually spins. That goes on last. And I'll usually just make sure to do a little wind. I'll normally use the crown, but again, since the crown doesn't actually wind the watch in this case, I'll just use a screwdriver on top of the barrel to make sure that the teeth are aligned before I go about screwing in the automatic winding module. Now, however, I can put on the rotor. It's got kind of a square-sided hole cut in the middle, and that means that it won't, when it spins, it'll actually drag around the gears inside rather than just spinning on its own. And that gets secured like so. And I can make sure that when I spin it, that the winding happens in both directions, which is what you want to see. Okay, here's the case back, a brand new gasket for it as well, just to make sure that more water doesn't come in. None did get in, so kudos to that gasket for holding up all that time. But it was done. I mean, it cracked basically under no pressure whatsoever. And now I can put the case back on, and I'll just use my rubber ball to tighten it down. And as you can see, the supervisor is here. She needs to. Oh, whoa! She really wants to make sure I did a good job, and she's looking at my work surface. Am I going to pass? Oh, I passed inspection once again, and she can run off and go grab a drink of water or whatever. Take a look at this thing in the case. That beautiful gray dial pops really nicely with the gold. It's kind of like a subtle with a really bright tone. I really like that. Yeah, this thing's looking really good. There is, of course, one part that we still need to deal with here, though, and that's the bracelet. So this is the original bracelet. It is the one with the engraving on it. As you can see, it's in fairly rough shape. A lot of the plating has worn off on the bottom and even some of it on the top. And I messaged with Corey, and we decided to replace the bracelet, and he's going to keep this one, the original one with the engraving, separately in a safe place so that he can make sure it doesn't get further damaged. So I picked up a couple of bracelets that are just kind of replacement ones. As you can see, this one has no brushing on either side. I like the design. It's a kind of a copy of a Rolex Oyster bracelet. This one's a copy of a Rolex Jubilee bracelet, but I like this one a little bit better for this watch. It's closer to the original, and it has the brushed to kind of contrast, which is how the case has. But it is too big. So I'm going to show you how to resize a bracelet like this. Basically, I use this tool. This is a Horatech tool to resize it. And you can see it's got a bunch of different colored pins, and you can use those to knock out the pins actually inside the bracelet that hold it together. So just a couple of quick taps, and it'll come through. And then that one will be, as you can see, kind of on the bench. And then what I can do is I can do that for just a couple of the links and then put them back together to take out a few. And I can get it closer to Corey's wrist size so that it'll be ready to go for his wedding when it arrives. Yeah, this tool makes it makes this really easy. But there's a bunch of, you can get really cheap tools to do this too. It's not a particularly crazy operation to make. It's just basically knocking these pins out and then knocking them back in. And as you can see, I'll get this one seated, but it does need to be made fully flush. So what I'll do is put it back in and do the same operation, just kind of in reverse to just get it so that it's seated correctly. And with that done, I can install the bracelet, and we are just about done with this thing. This one has quick release bars on it, so you don't even need to use any tools to install the bracelet or to take it off. And that means that Corey could also switch it out if he'd like, or put a leather strap on it or whatever. And let's see how this thing came out. Oh, that looks great. Oh, that is a wedding ready watch if I've ever seen one. It was really an honor to work on this watch that belonged to Corey's grandfather and that he's now going to wear at his wedding to remember his grandpa in a fond way. I think that that's really special, and I'm really grateful for being able to do this, and I'm really proud of how it came out. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you want to find me over on Instagram, I am wristwatch_revival over there. I'd love it if you've come by and say hi. And with that, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.